Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recover You. Today is part 4 of daily tools to live a life in recovery. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, Kylene. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm sitting here, I'm looking down at the dog, and I'm thinking we haven't fed her yet.
Oh, you're right.
We're horrible people.
Well, look how she's just sleeping in a ball.
She's sleeping there.
I think she's okay.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Sorry, everyone.
We will feed her as soon as the episode is
So please take notes and journal while we're talking about journaling.
Pause this episode if you have not yet fed your pet. Public service announcement.
Yep.
We do love our pets, I promise. Okay, so last week we talked about the 3 circles, and you were talking about how that can shift over time. And what we're doing in this series, if this is the first episode you've listened to, we encourage you to go listen to the first 3. But we're trying to share daily tools and resources and things that are fairly easy to incorporate that will help you move into sobriety and move from sobriety into recovery as you begin to become more self-aware and more aware of your feelings and your thoughts and your patterns. And so all of these are really, really effective tools. And so last week we talked about the 3 circles and how that shifts over time as you move from discovery to sobriety to recovery. Today we're going to talk about journaling, which we've mentioned a lot because it's one of your favorites, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You were a journaler before.
I was a journaler before, yeah. It actually started it. I wasn't a huge journaler for a long time, but I actually started it. I had listened to a Craig Groeschel podcast, and he talked about a 5-year journal. And it's basically every day has an entry over 5 years. And it's not a lot of space, but I started it in 19. Actually, so, some rough things had happened in 18. My mother had passed away. I had suffered kind of a setback professionally. Then you got cancer in 19. And so there was just a lot going on. And I, of course, at that point I was in my addiction, but I just felt horrible, emotionally. Just there was so much weird that was going on. So I started that then. And, it's interesting because I finished it, right? So in March of this year, I finished 5 years. So within that 5 years, you got better from cancer. I was discovered. We actually started to get better. Keegan got into West Point. Like there's a lot of really, really cool things that happened there. But certainly seeing my own personal growth over those 5 years has been tremendous. And so, I started another one. So I'm in the first year of the next one. But journaling is I knew it always would help. Getting into addiction recovery, I think it's crucial. I think it is necessary because as you go through this process, you're so full of emotion, and you're so full of and in this case, if you've betrayed somebody, there's a lot of pain there. There's a lot of concern for the person you've betrayed, hopefully. But, and you're trying to work that out. And it's not always easy to try to figure that out. And sometimes you got to put pen to paper and you got to go down there. So I know for myself, the Conquer series actually has a 7-day journal that allows you to work with a passage of scripture as well. And it allows you to check in on your faster scale. And so it was a much more involved, it was a 2-page thing.
Yeah, I would just say 2 things with journaling too. One is I had a client one time that had dyslexia. So if writing or journaling is difficult because of that, you can always audio record too. And if you want to use something like AI, or they have different transcription devices and stuff like that, that's always an option as well. So just to kind of think about, when we make these suggestions, it's like, how can you use the concept and make it work for you? But the second reason journaling is so helpful, whether it is verbally into a recording device or writing it down. And for most people, I think writing it down on the page is that there's this free flow aspect. You hear us talk about the conscious and the subconscious all the time. your subconscious comes out more easily when you're writing for whatever reason. And even if I think it can happen if you allow yourself to free flow talk as well. But when you write, if you allow yourself to just start, a lot of time it becomes flow of consciousness. And that's important because what we're trying to do with a lot of these recovery tools, like we mentioned in the last episode, is bring the patterns, the behaviors, the thoughts, the feelings that have either been suppressed or stuck in the subconscious for a long time up into the awareness of your consciousness. Mm-hmm. And so journaling can become a really good tool for that. And that can be a step-by-step process. You don't have to start with 5 pages. You can just bullet point some thoughts, and we're going to give you some questions that maybe would be helpful to answer, but just start writing, like just start documenting, particularly if there's feelings and stuff like that. But the reason that is so beneficial, there's something that has to do with like how it connects to your brain that helps you start processing things. And you can have you can give people journaling exercises, with a specific point and just have them free flow answer some questions. And while they're answering the questions, it's like, oh, there's an aha there. And that's what I mean by connecting the two, because if you could have just like logically ruminated and thought your way through and had that aha, you would have done that already. But doing exercises that pull from your subconscious mind allows those things to float up to the surface, and then you become aware of them. And so journaling is a fairly easy tool to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Once again, you don't need a fancy 5-year journal, like you said. You don't need the Conquer journal. You just need a notebook or your audio piece. And so what I always recommend is find a point in the day when you can be consistent. So for me, it was the morning. Some folks, it's right before they go to bed at night. Some folks, it's lunchtime hour. It doesn't matter. But try to find that moment where you've got a little bit of peace and quiet, because there is and I don't know if people would agree with me or not, but I feel like, at least in my case, journaling is like meditation. And so there has a meditative concept to it as you're kind of walking through that and putting things to paper and thinking about what you're going to say and that sort of thing.
I would also say a really good time to choose to do any of these daily tools and activities that we've been sharing in the past 3 and 4 episodes, is if there is a specific pattern time to your addiction. Mm-hmm. Choose to do these activities during those times. Right. So if you were someone that acted out in the morning, have a journaling practice in the morning. If you were someone that acted out before you went to bed, journal before you go to bed. If it was sometime during the day or in a specific room, put the journal in the room, right? Like do different things like that to, again, break that brain pattern, like we talked about a couple weeks ago with the train tracks. So thinking about your patterns and putting these positive replacements in can help move that along.
Yeah. I also think too, sometimes, especially a lot of men, they don't journal. Men have not journaled. And so it's a very new habit for them. And I always, we've talked about intentionality a lot, but you have to be very intentional. So here's a good example. If you when guys say, okay, I'm going to start journaling, I always ask when, what time, where are you going to do it? I always encourage them to do active things like leave the pen in the journal. So if you sit down somewhere with your coffee and your phone and your journal and you don't have a pen, you may just go off into Fox News on your phone or CNN on your phone, right? So be prepared, be deliberate. So, put the journal right next to the coffee pot and leave it there. When you're done with it, return it there. So in the morning, if you're picking up your coffee there to journal, it's there. So be very kind of deliberate and planned out as to how you're going to do this until it becomes more and more of a pattern.
You didn't intend to do this, but you just brought up news. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's worth a slight tangent here to say my personal suggestion would be, while you're getting into recovery, that you do not engage in watching or reading news cycles.
Oh, yeah.
So
it'll fire you up.
Yeah. Minimum the first 90 days that you're getting into sobriety, I would highly recommend avoiding news sites, avoiding watching news on the TV, avoiding listening to it on the radio. You do not need the drama. If there's something important enough to world events, you will hear it from a coworker or a friend or something. I don't ever do it anymore. I don't really find it healthy in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. you know what the important things are that's happening on in the world, the big bullet points, the big things, that's important. But beyond that, it's like, and especially when you are struggling with learning how to manage your emotions, don't pour any activating fuel on an emotional fire when your nervous system is so overactivated and you're trying to rebalance it.
Yeah.
So I would highly recommend that maybe that becomes a boundary for you during the 90 days at minimum, where you're like, let me just, take this out of my mental awareness and take it off my stress load, where like I'm not thinking about all of the horrible things that are happening in the world right now, because there's nothing you can do about them in this very moment. And the best thing you can do for the world in this very moment is get into recovery.
I actually heard somebody say this is not related to recovery. It's like sometimes people get so worried about things that are going on in the news. So let's say the war in the Middle East or whatever they may be. There are people who are paid to worry about those things. It's not you, right? And so, and maybe at some point, to your point, when you're more balanced and you can have nuance and you want to be part of a think tank, go be part of a think tank. But at this point, there's a lot of people that are actually professionally paid to manage those details and manage those crises and all of those things. Let them go do it.
I totally agree. So side tangent, but I think it's worth thinking about. And I would also say that for the betrayed partners as well, like while you're going through recovery, are there things that are just basic things in your life like that cause stress or any level of anxiety at all? Cut them out, if not permanently, at least temporarily, while you're rebalancing your nervous system.
Right. So, a couple things that when you start to journal, if you haven't journaled, these are really good prompts to kind of go through. And this is what helped me. So once again, I would only journal once a day. You can journal multiple times a day if you want, but I would only journal once a day. And the things I would think about is what happened over the last 24 hours? What is it that transpired? Was there some good things that you want to talk about? Were there some tough things that I want to talk about? And so, what was that 24 hours like? So just basic. And you could create like you could have a chronological journal entry that day. There's nothing wrong with that because it's
just bullet point it too. Yeah. Like these are like, I had a conversation with my spouse. This is similar to like what you would journal as like, Kylene and I had a conversation about XYZ. It didn't go well. I'm feeling bad today. It's like super basic like that. Yep. And that's okay too. It doesn't have to be like, again, it doesn't have to be like 5 pages of how do I feel about this. You can kind of keep track about things. Although part of what's going to be helpful, kind of again, mixing all of these tools together is going to be at least specifically identifying how you feel about it, right? So like use more specific language, even if it's truncated in terms of like it's a paragraph of journaling, that's okay. But make sure it's, clear and specific and maybe that gets developed over time.
Right. I think the second thing would be, how do you feel? How do you feel right then? How do you feel? Those are good things to journal about too. I mean, because once again, we're trying to connect with feelings. We've never really identified them before. We've never recognized them before. We've never validated those feelings. So how do you feel? Do you feel sad? Do you feel hurt? Sometimes,
energized?
Yeah, sometimes through, discovery in that process, you can feel and the betrayed sometimes doesn't like to hear some of that stuff, but sometimes you could feel like things are unfair and things are coming. I would always recommend put that stuff down because it's important to kind of, then when you go back the next day and you go, okay, why did I feel unfair about that? Was that the right way to think? You know what I mean? So like
the key there is the self-reflection.
That's right.
It's not just a journal to vent about your spouse.
Right.
That's not the point. And I would say if there is a lot of conflict, this is going to be different for every partnership. So for us, I had open access to your journals for a long time. And then I still do, but you've asked me to say like, and I never look at them anymore, but you were like, hey, I really want to make sure that I feel free to write whatever I want. Can you just let me know ahead of time if you're going to look at them? Like, tell me, hey, I'm going to go check them or whatever. And so I really don't read them anymore, but for a while I did. And part of that was I knew that journaling was more of your, kind of what we talked about, right? More free flow, very direct, very honest. And so I kind of wanted to just check in, like, how is he feeling about everything? Like, where is he really at? Like, how's he truly feeling? Right now, there are some instances where that can be, that can induce hurt feelings depending on what is going on. So I think as a couple, be aware where you're at and then communicate about it, and definitely know your boundaries around that. So if there is a boundary around reading it, don't read it, right? Like,
that's right. That's right. Yeah. I would say, you got to remember, like, journals are, if
it's a processing tool.
It's a processing tool. And you're not always right with what you write down. You're not always on the right side of history with everything that you put in. It's just part of getting it out.
You definitely want, like, if on both sides, right? Like the betrayed partner would want the freedom to write about their anger and their disgust and all this kind of stuff. And it's okay to feel that way. And let's say this way, it becomes a problem if that is an ongoing long-term unresolved emotion.
I would say this, if you...
It's not going to be a problem if it's just processing. I'm journaling because I'm processing this specific event, and this is a processing tool that's helping me move through the emotion. But if it becomes like, what's that movie, The Mean Girls? If it becomes the burn book, where it's like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. This is just my venting tool. We want it to be a processing tool, and so if you have upset emotions, that's the place to put them. But the point is to move through them, so then maybe tomorrow's a better day.
So one of the common emotions that a recovering addict can feel, especially in a relational context, is resentment. That's a very, very common thing. And sometimes the betrayed spouse doesn't want to hear that there's resentment, but where it comes from is it's the classic dichotomy, or the coming up against of, I'm doing all this work, I've done all of these things, I'm showing up, I'm doing all of this stuff, I'm still getting blasted.
Yeah, because on our side, it's like, well, congratulations. You cheated on me for 10 years, you've been sober for 3 months, I'm not going to throw you a party.
Yeah.
And we're both, so both emotions are valid in a sense on both sides. And so, the betrayer, the addict, he needs to kind of work through that, because you can't expect a party, and we're not going to get over it in 3 months, and we're going to take some time to process, and we need that time.
And I think what you said, the journaling is a processing tool. One of the entries on the FASTER scale where you are is resentment. So if you can actually put on in the journal that you're feeling resentful towards your spouse, boy, is that a really great indication of where you are on that FASTER scale. So, a lot of times journaling as you're working through things can be calls to action. Like, man, I've gone 5 days in a row and I'm really filled with resentment. I didn't think I needed to call check in with my buddy. I better do that.
I think that's an example of like an initial flash of resentment isn't necessarily meaning like, oh, that's horrible, because it's a natural human thing to be like, well, I'd like recognition for all this hard work I'm doing, right? Like there's a natural desire there to be recognized by the person you're trying to rebuild trust with, right? But over time, it is a selfish thing if you're demanding it, or if it's become a thing where you're like, man, I'm building in resentment when she has every right to be hurt because I've destroyed her life, right? And so the idea is it's a processing tool that brings it up to your awareness. You can process it. You can talk to somebody about it. You can move through it. You can understand, well, actually, maybe I should think about this a little differently, because why would I expect her to forgive me, or not even forgive, but why would I expect her to be happy and celebrate me when like the timeline doesn't even match up, right? You can't expect somebody to, right? And so think it allows you to kind of think through that. So then if you're using the FASTER scale or you're journaling, you're like, man, I've been resentful for like 5 days, and it's this really unhealthy thing, then that it's a sign, right, that you should be talking to someone about it, because it's not going to be beneficial for you, your relationship, your sobriety, or any of those things.
Yeah, and none of these tools are used in isolation. So as I said when we were talking about the FASTER scale, I would sit down to journal. I would look at my FASTER scale. How am I feeling? Where does it fit on the FASTER scale? Is there cause for alarm? Is there something I need to do? To your point, have I been there? Yeah. So I always use those tools together. They were very supportive of each other.
I was going to say that's a really good point, actually, because there may be people that think, well, I have every right to feel resentful. But then if you are using something like the faster scale and it's like, oh, resentfulness is like down on the faster scale,
way down on there.
then it's like a red flag of like, well, why am I feeling this way and how should I process that? So that's actually a great way to use them together, because someone may go, well, I have every right to be resentful. Like, I've done everything right for the past 3 months, right? And it's like someone in their life needs to reach out and tell them like, no, like this is normal.
I actually just thought of this, and I think sometimes maybe we don't talk about this enough, but here's a good example. We've talked about the betrayed spouse having to heal, and we've talked about the addicts starting to heal, and in a lot of cases, the addict is healing in some ways faster than the betrayed spouse. What you want to do is you want to get to a point where you can, let's say that's the case. Let's say you are light years ahead of the betrayed spouse in healing, right? So as opposed to sitting in resentment, imagine how powerful that would be, is to go to the betrayed spouse and say, hey, I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned that, we're 27 years into this process.
Oh my gosh.
No, I'm just saying, I'm being silly on purpose. But
27 years in, go back and start listening to this podcast.
Yeah, right.
Together.
We're 27 years into this process, and you're still talking about these things and these things here. I haven't done anything in 27 years, right? And so I'd really like to find a way for you to get a little bit more healing. And, what can I do? How can I help out? How can I be there for you? And once again, it's a very extreme example, but that's the point. I think
here's like kind of where we were talking about, like with the, I mean, we're kind of getting stuck on the resentfulness thing here, but, so I'm just going to take the same example that I used a minute ago. So, because this is very common, and obviously we have different perspectives, right? The addict perspective, the betrayed perspective. You work in a lot of groups with men, so you see a lot of different stories, and I work with a lot of women, and so I see a variety of men that maybe are or are not in groups, or are in different levels of healing, all kinds of things. So we see different stories all over the place. And so let's go back to a guy that's in 3 months of, at that point, we can only call it sobriety, right? He's feeling resentful. He wants attention. And so I'm going to challenge that person who's feeling resentful towards his betrayed spouse, whose life has just exploded, but he's feeling really good because he just got into sobriety. And so he's starting to rebalance after 3 months, right? And he's like, oh, this feels good. I don't ever want to go back. Why doesn't she trust me and all this kind of stuff, right? I want to be celebrated at this point. I did this really, really hard thing. And it's like, okay, you get all of that attention, that support, that affirmation from your support group. Now I want you to think about how you felt at the worst part of your addiction. That's like, that's sort of maybe mimicking what your spouse is feeling right now. So we feel things while you're getting into recovery, like we are living the life that you lived in the past, in the present, right, because we didn't have the opportunity to do that when it was actually happening because we didn't know about it. Mm-hmm. So you can't, it's like a respect thing. You have to respect that the timelines are different. Right. You have to be empathetic about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so like if, in the faster scale, we defined it, a couple episodes ago, but that the R that's above the F on faster, which is restoration. And one of the big things there is empathy. It's it's being open and honest. It's being there for people. That's what restoration actually means. So if you're in that and you're feeling that every day, well, you're not in restoration.
Yeah.
And so the whole point is you got to resolve that. You got to resolve that, and the journal can really, really help you. So the other prompt I had is there anything coming up, and how do you feel about that? And I think we kind of covered that a lot with this example.
So the couple different ways to use a journal is to bullet point like what's happened over the past 24 hours since the last time you journaled. Mm-hmm. Maybe thinking about journaling at specific times where you typically would act out. Journaling about how you are currently feeling in that very moment, and or noticing how you felt over the past 24 hours. If there was anything a little bit different, maybe you guys had an argument and it didn't go well, or maybe things went really, really well and you guys like connected more, or you had a really great support group, or you had a really great aha in your therapy session, or, whatever it is. Or maybe there's like a day that comes and you're like, you know what? I walked through the mall today and I objectified anyone. And I didn't even think about my addiction and I lived a normal life. And that's like mm-hmm. the first time that you remember doing that since you were 8, right. And so you're journaling out those things, and then you're noticing like, if there are things coming up, if there is anger, if there is resentment, if there is anxiety, if there is overwhelm, Where is that coming from? How am I feeling about that? What am I going to do about it? I think that's another thing you can also journal, right? Is like, what actions am I going to take on this? Like, how do I manage this? Do I have breathing techniques that I can do? Do I need to take a walk? Do I need to call my sponsor? Do I need to call someone in my group? Do I text my group? Do I book a session with my therapist? Do I talk to my spouse? Like, is the reason I'm feeling anxiety because the conversation we had last night was unresolved and I just need to resolve that? Like, processing, like, how do I fix this? Right? Like, what do I do about this?
Yeah. I told the story how I started journaling before I was discovered, but you can really see in those pre-discovery journal entries, you can see denial, you can see anguish, you can you can really see a lot of emotions that come up, pain, you know what I mean? There's the, what's wrong with me sort of sense in there. I don't know if I ever actually said that outright in there, but you can just really see, and so I think it's always hard to say the combination or whatever, but you could argue it was starting to kind of do something, and I think having had established that habit and then being discovered, it really was something I could lean into and build. So I can't say it enough for if you haven't started a journaling habit, start it.
Okay.
Get going.
So you have journaled, you've had like 10 different kinds of journals over the course of how many years?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you'll even be able to remember them. You've mentioned the 5-year journal.
Yep.
Out of all the journals that you've journaled, some of them were specifically Conquer journals, like that came with the curriculum. Out of all the different types of journals that you've used, do you think you have a favorite and why?
I guess I'd have to go with the one that I've stayed the most consistent with, and that's the 5-year journal, because I think it's a really powerful, we've done, I think it's the Kairos journal. There's the first hour kind of journal thing that 7 Pillars program had a journal.
Those just like real briefly, like explain the
types
of journals, because someone might be like, oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, there are journals out there that are highly guided, and so they'll say, hey, the first 10 minutes you're gonna do this, and then you're gonna read Proverbs, a chapter out of Proverbs on the day of the month that it is, and then you're gonna reflect on that. And so there's some really, they have you write goals, and so there's some really, really specific things, and I would actually encourage everybody to do those. My feeling is like at one point I was carrying around like 3 journals and things like that. So I love the exercise. I think even if it's a 90-day deal and you're kind of working through something and you're using a different format, I would encourage you to play with it. Really, really play with it and find something that works for you. I think what I've ultimately arrived at, I'm certainly biased. I think I saw this tremendous transformation, and I think what I'm excited about now is, what does the next 5 years hold for me? You know what I mean? Because I never knew starting in 19 that it was going to lead to this transformation, right? And so,
well, and it was cool because, like you said, you started it in the addiction,
right?
But by the time you were done, there were more years journaled in sobriety than there were in the addiction. So that was like a big thing for you too.
Yeah, and I think it's one of these things that I may pick up from time to time and just thumb through it and just kind of think back on what that is. And that's what's really nice about the 5-year journal.
I will also say another benefit to the 5-year specifically is we've talked about cellular memory and traumatic memory occasionally. And just as a little refresh, it's like when your body remembers specific events that have happened and that was really hard, that maybe consciously you're not even thinking about, like April 25th was disclosure or something like that, and you don't necessarily remember April 25th, but then next year on April 23rd and 24th you're starting to feel really anxious. You're like, why am I feeling really anxious? And so the one thing that was really nice about the 5-year journal is sometimes they're like, man, Patrick, like I'm not feeling very good, like I'm feeling really depressed, and you'd be like, you know what, like I was looking at my 5-year journal today and this is the week that XYZ happened, and it was like a big thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think that's it. So that actually happened several times where you had documented things that I would end up feeling like the next year and did not remember. And so there's, I think, even I think there's something to that, to be able to connect those dots.
Right.
Because if I hadn't had that, I was just like, what's going on?
Yeah.
So I think that's actually a pretty cool benefit.
It really is. And I don't think you get that obviously from the 90 days and things like that. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with whatever format you decide on. I mean, there really isn't. And there's so many good ones out there. There's even great online journals that you can, people have really thought through a lot of these formats and stuff like that. I think that the challenge, especially a lot of our pornography addictions are related to computers. And so the online journaling and things is just something you got to be mindful of. You know what I mean? Can you do the online journal? Absolutely. You just have to have a safety plan around it, to make sure that.
I mean, again, I think there is something I think they've kind of documented about physically handwriting.
Right.
But if typing's the way that it gets done, then typing's the way that it gets done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, again, working in a way that done is better than not done, right?
That's right.
And so
right.
it's all going to be helpful, whatever way allows you to do it. So you have done several journals, and you also would mention that you would do several of them at a time sometimes.
Right.
So my final question for this episode, which does mean we're going to make a 5-part episode or 5-part series.
27 parts.
Yeah. Is my final question for this one is what I'm going to call it the morning stack, but again, realizing that people can do this depending on when they act out and when the best time of day is for them. What is the Patrick 5-star recovery morning stack?
All right. So what do I feel like the most accomplished if I do in the morning? Like, what is it where I'm like, I'm living into recovery.
Say is like, okay, maybe your personal one, and then maybe truncate it to what would you recommend for everyone in general?
So, I think for me, it would be getting up, working out, right? Going for a run, doing some sort of thing, some sort of exercise, yoga, whatever it may be, and then grabbing a cup of coffee, going down, sitting in the chair, and starting. The first thing I always pick up is my 5-year journal. So in those cases where I was journaling multiple things, because right now I'm going through a book called The First Hour by Mark Cook, and that's a journal, and it has a lot of specific prayers and things that you do. So I do the 5-year journal first. Then I do the first hour. So it's taking me 30, 40 minutes to kind of get through that thing. And so, and then I'm done. And I might play that. We have this, my wife and I have this game. It's called Fishdom on the phones. And so we might play a level or two, depending on what's happening there. 34 if you get a good streak. Yeah. So, but it's interesting because then I, go shower or whatever. And so and I always do a little bit of self-care. Like I have a red light thing and I actually do some of that, or I put something on my knee to kind of help it out. So you get up and you're energized. You've done this work that, and oddly enough, 3.5 years in, you forget about what you used to do. You kind of do. You forget about what your life used to be, how frantic it was, and how you were trying to keep secrets and you were trying to stop and all these. You just calmly go about a healthy way of life. And it involves journaling. It involves, in our case as Christians, spending time in scripture. It involves, some self-care. It involves a lot of different things that are part of that stack. So,
So for your perfect morning, it's movement, coffee, devotions, journaling,
right.
Food.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe a cold shower.
Cold shower. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I think, that would translate effectively to anyone else. If you had to shorten that, what would you say are the absolute, this would be beneficial for everyone. Nobody should skip this.
I would say the 5-year journal. You got to get in there and do that. You got to journal.
Some version.
Some version of journaling, and something that's challenging you. Occasionally I'll have these things where I'll bring it in. Well, I'll read 15 pages of a book, depending on what. I'm not doing that right now because I'm doing the first hour book. So I'm always doing something other than the 5-year journal.
Well, I think that goes into we were talking about earlier, even with the 3 circles with the other episode,
right.
Is it changes over time, right? So if you are getting bored of journaling, find a different type of journal.
Yeah.
If you have free flow journaled forever, find a guided journal. All of these different kind of ways to keep that personal growth and that thinking and that forward movement.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Well, okay. I said that was the last question, but this is the last question. How do you think that journaling has impacted you the most since recovery?
I'll just start with, I know you said since recovery. Pre-recovery, it was like an exercise in trying to get there, and anguish and all of these things. And when you look at it now, it's a record of life as it's supposed to exist, with its ups and downs, and you're not hiding, and you're not running away from what life has to present. Life is hard. But it's beautiful, all in the same token. And so I think for me, what it's allowed me to do is think more clearly. And I've noticed that, if you look at that first 90 days, year and a half, it was very recovery focused, relational focused. It's moved into a lot of things, like it's still very relational in a lot of ways, but it's moved into things like work and how can I be a better communicator? And so kind of, broadening beyond just the topic of recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's allowed me to move in kind of a deliberate way through those things.
And what would you, again, I said that was the last question. And what would you say, like, I know you probably run into people that find it difficult to journal. So like, what would be your encouragement to them?
You got to give it a chance. It's much like anything. You're not gonna win a marathon, going on a 1-2 mile run once. You have to put in the work. And so it's very much one of these things, much like most things in life, that if you put the time in, you're going to start to see the benefit. So give yourself the chance, carve out the time. For those of you who have betrayed your spouses, there would be, and we've said this before, your spouse would probably, her jaw would drop to the floor if you were like, hey, give me 15 minutes. I need to journal today.
Because it's part of my recovery.
Because it's part of my recovery.
It's going to help me.
Yeah, I hear this sometimes, like, hey, it's just too busy in the house. I'm like, I actually don't. I believe houses are very busy, and I get that with kids and things like that. But when you are committed to something and you carve out the right time, now you don't want to sit on the couch and watch basketball all night where your wife is taking care of the kids, and then when it comes time to give them a bath, you say, hey, I need to journal. That's not fair. But when things are done, you say, hey, give me 15 minutes. I'll come to bed, but I'll be there in 15 minutes. I'm going to journal.
Yeah.
And so you got to create that time. You got to carve that out. It's that important, I believe.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to say about the benefit of journaling?
I think I've said it all.
Okay. So that wraps up episode 4. So we are going to have a 5-part series of daily tools. So stay tuned next time, because we're going to talk about support groups and therapy and why we find them to be so impactful for true recovery. See you then. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.